Okay, so we're starting at lesson 13, and in this lesson, we're going to move to another Adobe program called Adobe Illustrator. If you haven't already downloaded and installed it yet, go ahead and pause this and download and install the program. It's what we're going to be working with for the next 3 lessons. Adobe Illustrator is their vector editor. So Adobe Photoshop, edit rasters, Adobe Illustrator, to create vectors and edit vectors. So in this one, we're going to review the layout, which honestly is pretty close to Photoshop, so we're going to go through it pretty quick. And then we're going to learn some kind of basic layout of tools and how we can start editing vectors and throw some text and images into it. A lot of it's going to be pretty familiar from Photoshop, and there'll be a few different things. While we're doing that, we are going to make a printable sticker that you could then print off and stick on something like a sketchbook or some other area. In my case, I threw some office hours up here and some contact. You can throw whatever you want on your own sticker. All right, let's go ahead and review the difference between vector and raster. Okay, here we have a design that uses both raster and vector elements in its designs. Like we did kind of the same thing in Photoshop. Sometimes we included a couple of raster elements and sometimes we included a couple of vector elements, mostly raster. In this case, we're going to work mostly vector. So a raster image, if you recall, is anything that's made up of pixels. So if we see this background image right here, it's high detail. There's lots of things going on. It looks like a photograph. And if I zoom in on it, what we find out at some point is that they are made up of individual little pixels. And like we were seeing in Photoshop, there's a limit to how much we can change and edit them before we start seeing problems. Even our fancy versions of raster, like like our raw files, there's only so far we can push them. We can push them pretty far, but only so far. Versus what we see here with llama is that it's actually a vector. So if I click onto it, we can see that it is made up of these lines. These lines have little control points on them that allow me to, let's just select one of them, allows me to move and change the appearance of these guys really quickly. Similarly, these control points will have these little Bezier curve controls that will allow me to further control the appearance of the vector. Now, vectors come in a couple brands. In this case, we have a vector shape, which is a closed shape, as in there's like this line is continuous, it goes all the way and closes something. That shape then has the attribute of a fill, which I can very quickly and easily change without any degradation to my image as long as it stays a vector. I can even do fancy things like add gradients to it. Just like what we were doing in Photoshop, I can also do things like add strokes to it. In this case, since I'm in Illustrator, I can add really fancy strokes where it's more than just a black line or a green line or a red line or something like that. So again, when we're working with Illustrator, Illustrator mostly makes these bad boys, while Photoshop is mostly for working and editing with these bad boys. Oh, that's a gradient. Mostly working with these, that's another gradient. Oh my goodness. Mostly for working with these bad boys back here, a raster image. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right, Adobe Illustrator. Since you've already used Adobe Photoshop, you're going to know a lot about Illustrator already, so we'll go through some of this pretty fast. There are a couple of key differences. So like here in the home screen, everything's going to be pretty much the same. So like we have suggestions, we'll have our learn feature in here. We have new and open, your cloud sync status, your access to your cloud stuff, your cloud sync status up here, search. We also have this little present icon that I love because it's a way of getting back to the little splash screen for whatever the newest install was. Pretty frequently when you're starting a program, you don't have time to putz around with that, so you just kind of skip it and you can come back to it later. And then access to your Adobe account. Now, unlike Photoshop, we're generally going to be making a new file in Illustrator rather than editing something that's already existing. So we're going to go ahead and click New File. In New File, we could click one of these to change background stuff. We're just going to stick in the basics for now. Where it says Untitled 1, we're going to type in our intended document name. So we're going to type in Chapter 13-sticker. So we're going to make a sticker like where you could slap into a sketchbook or something else to get it returned. Notice that we start off in a weird format, something called points. So we have points and pecas now, which are a measurement style used for fonts. So like when you're doing 12-point font or 24-point font, that's that measurement style. So if you do a lot of text-heavy layout, you're going to care a lot about points and pecas because it'll make your life easier to work in it. But for us today, we're going to mostly stick in inches because we're familiar with it. If you get a lot into typography and graphic design, you will have to learn points and pecas. So I'll pick inches, and we're going to switch our width to be 7, and we're going to switch our height to be 5. Notice that we still have orientation. Now artboards is a little bit more encouraged to use in this one because it's set up for artboards versus canvas in Photoshop, although again, Photoshop can do artboards. We're going to stick with 1. Bleed, so like this is what we did with that sticker where we made that extra space that could be cut off. Since a lot of stuff in Illustrator goes to print, they have bleed built into the settings right here and they appear as guides. It's very handy. Similarly, since a lot of stuff goes to print, they're working in CMYK. We're going to go ahead and switch to RGB, and we're going to leave our raster effects at 300 and then click Create. Now, for whatever reason, Adobe has been doing this thing lately, which drives everyone up the wall, which is they assume their stuff is just too hard for people to use. And so they make these really dumbed down workspaces that are utterly and completely worthless in every way. So the first thing, whenever you open an Adobe program, you should come up to the top right and click here and see if you're stuck in something where they've pared it down too much, like getting started. Whatever idiot at Adobe thought this was good idea should just be fired. Go to Essentials Classic, because this will give you a layout of pretty much everything that you care about when you're getting started in Illustrator. So like, this is the stuff that you will need to know if you're going to use Illustrator. If you're getting started, this will match pretty much no professional video on Illustrator and is pretty much missing everything that you care about. Like I can't get over how bad of a layout this is. So go to Essentials Classic, and we're going to go ahead and click on Layers, so we have it opened like so. Much is going to be the same, so we still have our workspace surrounding our, in this case, artboard. We still move around using Command or Control plus or minus. We can still hit Command 0 to fit this on our screen. We can still hold down the space bar to move everything around. Over on our left, we still have all of our toolbars, although notice that we now have a fill and a stroke rather than a background and foreground color. We also have the placement of what we're going to be doing. So like this would be like placed it on top. This would be like placed behind. So if I throw a shape on here, and I throw another shape on here, this one appears on top, versus if I switch it, it now appears behind. I don't want that active. Let's go ahead and nuke those though. And then we also have, access to fill, gradient, and null, meaning nothing inside it. We have screen modes right here, which is another way of accessing some of the stuff in tab. I'm not going to be too worried about that. We have access to additional stuff in our toolbar. Don't really want to worry about that either. Now notice as I click between these different tools, we have a new interface. We have a new, not interface, we have a new behavior, which is this doesn't change. So these are just the properties of any object that I have on the screen. So like if I have two objects right here, and I click onto one of them to make it active, I can change its appearance up here. Or I can change what is going on with my tool that I'm about to use up there as well. So this is like, so you can't really call it a tool option bar anymore. We're going to call it, our control panel. Notice that in our control panel, we still have access to fill and stroke size, and then some fancy attributes related to stroke. So like in Photoshop, we mostly messed with these. We're going to have a lot more control over those kind of appearances in Illustrator because it's designed to work with those. Similarly, over here in our layers panel, it's all much the same, with the key difference being in layers. So every time I add an object to something in Illustrator, it appears as a new element over here in my layers panel. And I can always make it active by clicking over here to the left of in my layers panel. And you can think of layers as like a form of supergroup. I can still group stuff. So like I can still Command A and Command G and I've got a group, but I can also make a new layer in which to make new elements. I need to make that layer active though. There we go. Layer active. I got to set it as the target. There we go. Boop, 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 boop. We can see that when I make these ones active, this one's labeled red, this one's labeled blue. So when the individual objects are active, labeled blue, labeled, where's my red one? Red. I should switch to in front again. And we can see now how that can group stuff together. So like if I'm doing a design, I might set up a layer just for the background. It might have like 30, 40, 500 elements in it. And like if I have a figure, I'll do one for the figure. If I have another figure, I'll have another layer for that figure. And I still might do subgrouping in there. So like if I've drawn the figure, I might do a grouping for the face, for the arms, for a shoe, or other things like that. Let me nuke this extra layer. So not a lot that's different, but plenty of things is, not everything is the same, but not everything is so different that it's kind of hard to initially navigate for us. We still have our contextual taskbar. Our menus are still going to be laid out similarly, but there are going to be some small differences. Okay, moving forward, let's go ahead and add our first vector shape. So I'm going to make the square tool active right here. And I'm going to come up to the top and let's just pick any old fill. So I'm going to do red, and why don't I do green for my stroke? And why don't we set our stroke to 10 to kind of see what this guy looks like? Now, just like in Photoshop, I can click and it will ask me how big I want to make it, and I can click and drag to add a shape. Now, I have a lot more control over these shapes in Photoshop. Like, we have some of these controls, we didn't cover it in Photoshop, but so some of these tools will still be in that program, but we have access to their Illustrator's better laid out to use them. So we have two types of select tools. So you can kind of think of these as the move tool on steroids from Photoshop. I have the select tool and the direct select tool. The select tool is for working with whole objects, including being able to rotate and resize these guys quickly. Also note that unlike in Photoshop, when I go over a corner and I start resizing, it does not keep everything in proportion to each other. If I'm resizing and I want to keep in proportion, I'll need to hold down the Shift key while I'm resizing stuff. And so basically it's working for with whole objects, versus the direct select tool allows me to work with individual parts of that object. So we can see that we have a control point here, an anchor, and an anchor, and then we have these little curve guys. So I can click on any of these little circles inside the box and I can round the corners. Similarly, I can click on an individual anchor point and I can move an individual anchor point to wherever I want. I can also click on a path, the spot connecting the two anchor points. So remember from chapter, 4 maybe, where we had our little anchor points for our vectors and we had our lines that connect them together. So this is our vector shape, lines connected by anchor points connected by lines. And we have all sorts of powerful ways of interacting with them. Also, unlike in Photoshop where it defaults to selection, our alignments will automatically default to artboard, making it really quick and easy for us to move things around. Another thing to note is that we have exact positioning again, where I can type in the exact position of an object. But notice if I type in 0, 0, which in Photoshop would put the object top left corner here in the top left corner, boop, and boop. It puts the center of my object in the top left corner. So this is different from Photoshop. We have this little box right here that allows me to tell where I want an individual section of my object to end up. So I have a lot more precise controls over the placement of my objects. Also notice as I put in that 0, 0, it is referring to the anchor points and not the stroke. All right, if you added that shape, go ahead and click on it with the select tool and just hit delete on your keyboard to remove it from Illustrator. Also note that we have access to our appearance over here, and we'll also have access to appearance of our object over here in properties. So we can change anywhere you see these things pop up, you can change it in those spots to change the appearance. All right, let's add our first shape that we care about. So we're going to add a little border for our sticker. So I'm going to make the rectangle tool active. I'm going to set the fill to null or nothing. I'm going to set my stroke to be black. And I'm going to set my stroke size to be 5. Oops, I missed that. 5. I'm going to click on my screen, and it's going to ask me how big I want to make it. I want to make it 6 by 4. And then I want to center it. So I'll click Center button, and I will click Center button to place it center in my screen. You know what, maybe 5 is a little too thin. We're at up here where it says 5. Let's go ahead and actually bump this up to 10. And then let's curve our corners. So I can curve my corners again by clicking on one of these tools, one of my select tools, and then clicking and dragging in here. I can also set that curve over here in transform. So I can click on these little dots. We can see that I have direct access to that curving right about here. I'll make sure this chain link is turned on, and instead of whatever value you end up with, do 0.5. Oops, did it not take it? Did not take it. 0.5. There we go. And now I have these nice little round corners on here. Now, just like in Photoshop, I can quickly and easily add raster, or actually any vector attributes I have as well, assets I have as well to my design by coming up to File and going to Place. Notice that it's just labeled Place rather than Embed or Linked. And that's because Linked is now going to be a checkmark box down here. So we'll click on our llama.png. Link is turned on by default. Again, for certain graphic design uses, link is the bee's knees. For us today, we're going to turn linked off. And what this does is link again will refer where this image is on my hard drive. Like if I send somebody a copy of this Illustrator file without packaging it, that file isn't on their computer, so it's not there. Versus if I turn link off, I'll end up with a larger file size for my Illustrator design because the image will be embedded in the design. So I'm going to click Place. Excuse me. And unlike Photoshop, it loads up on my cursor. And that's because usually if you just click, it appears in there gargantuan. So unless you want it to appear gargantuan, I would usually just click and drag to get it in initially, and then continue to do your sizing and modification on it as needed. So let's go ahead and make sure the llama is active, and let's change its size. So either up here in the control panel or over here in the properties panel, we want to make it 2 by 2. Now, notice again, in Photoshop, this would normally be defaulted on. So like if I type in 2 right now for my width, we can see that it only changes the width. So you either need to type 2 into both of these boxes, or if you haven't typed it in yet, you can click on the chain link. And if you type in 2, it will proportionally change the other one as well. And in this case, since it's square, they will be both 2. With the select tool still active, go ahead and click and drag this down until you see a pink line referring to center, and just kind of eyeball it a little bit away from the side. That'll look just fine. Next, we want to add in some of our text. And when we're in text, a couple of things that are just going to be irritating about this is we're used to be able to click on stuff to make it active. If I click too many times on something, I'm going to end up in isolation mode. And I can tell I'm in isolation mode because I have this little arrow right here under this gray bar. If you end up in isolation mode, you can click on that arrow until you get out of it, or you can click escape on your keyboard to exit isolation mode as well. Also, just like in Photoshop, tab can hide and display your workspace. And then even more so than in Photoshop, you can lose your design as it just kind of disappears off to the side. Control 0 or Command 0 will fit that on your screen. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a little bit of contact up here. So we're going to click T for text tool. And you know what, while we're working with our text tool, maybe we don't want to accidentally be able to work with these objects over here. So to the next to the eye, go ahead and click that little space, and we're going to temporarily lock these so we don't accidentally move this stuff while we're working. Let's click towards the bottom. And where it says Myriad Pro, we're going to instead do Arial Black. And for the size, we're going to do 42. And then we want to access our tracking and stuff like that. So we could come over to Window and pop it out of it's now under Type rather than Character up here. It's now under Type and go into Character. Or since controlling text is so common in Illustrator, it's actually now also over here in the Properties panel. Very handy. And I can also click on these dots to get a fuller display of everything that's there. In our case, we just want to change the tracking to be -25. We'll change this to be Regan D. Pufal. I'll grab the move tool and I'm going to move this into an attractive position. And now I want to add, well, let's get it centered. Yeah, actually, why don't we just click the center button rather, there we go. And now I want to add an email address underneath this. So it seems like I should just be able to click off to the side with the select tool so nothing's active anymore. And I can pick up the text tool and I want it to appear right under the text. But whenever I click on the text, it's really easy to accidentally end up in this text box. So something you might find yourself needing to do is to lock it, and then you can add text very easily next to it, or you can just make text off to the side and then drag it down to where it's needed. Whatever method you want to do will work for us today. In my case, I'm going to lock stuff as I go, so I'm not putzing with it. So T for text tool. I'm going to come over to the side again, and I've got some controls I want to put in. We're going to switch from Arial Black to Arial Regular. I just need Arial. So Arial, and that sets it as regular. We're going to set the size to be 12, and we're going to reset our tracking to be 0. And then since mine is locked, I can just click underneath it to start adding my text, and I'll do Regan at regandpufal.com. I'll switch back to the select tool, and I'm going to drag this over. Notice now that we have something called glyph bound, which is locking stuff in based on the edge of the text. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it just slightly in from the edge of the L. Because I don't want it to be perfectly in line with the L. I want it to be just ever so slightly in a little bit. And as we're working with Illustrator, text is going to be a little goofy. Because there's going to be, it's like, why don't we just make it perfectly to the edge? And it's because stuff looks good as long as it visually appears like it's in alignment. even if it's not necessarily an alignment. Like here, let me throw my ruler out and I'll show you an example. So like I've just brought a line down and we can see that this is snapping to the baseline of the L, the P, and the F. But if we look closely, we can see that the baseline of the A and the U is actually lower than that line. So like even though when we remove that line, everything looks like it's an alignment, we can see in reality it isn't. And that's where like a lot of really good graphic design will come in. It's like, how can you visually kind of putz with things to make it look slightly better by making things slightly off. All right, let's do T for text tool again. And then I'm going to come up here and lock my email just in case, because I don't want to accidentally open it. And I'm going to come over to my tool, my options for my character, and I'm going to do Arial regular again. I'm going to set my size to be 33 points. And I'm going to, oops, I can't tab because I didn't have active. I'm going to do tracking, and I'm going to set my tracking to be -10. And then up here at the top, I'm going to go ahead and click. And I'm going to do Mr. Pufal's office hours. Then I can hit escape to exit the typing tool, or I can click off to the side. I can click this select tool and click off to the side, but I need it active after I finish typing. I'm going to center it. Boop. And I'm going to bring it up. I'm just going to eyeball where I want it. I'm going to want it pretty close to the top, maybe about like so. Looks pretty good to me. And then we want to add in a little bit more text right here for the actual office hour. So I'll lock this one as well. And I'm going to click T for text tool. This time I'm going to do right alignment. And I'm going to come over and change a few things over here again. I'm going to do sizing at 21. And I'm going to do tracking at -10 again. By the way, when you're working with a lot of text, you are pretty much always going to want to putz with all the settings. So don't be afraid to mess around with them. Also, when you're adding text to your design, 1 or 2 fonts, but notice that we've been using a couple different weights of our font. That is fine, but you want to try to styles of our fonts. You want to stick with a font or 2 in most designs, and make everything as readable as possible, except for maybe some like fancy titles or maybe a quote or so. Anyway, let's go ahead and add this text. I'm just going to click, and it's going to be a little tedious, but we're going to do capital M space 10:15 to 11:15 a.m. And then we're going to do Tuesday, and we're going to do 11:45 to 12:45 p.m. Got a space. Boop. There we go. Then we'll do Wednesday. I'm capitalizing the days of the week, by the way. 10:15 to 11:15 a.m. It doesn't really seem like it matters until you do Thursday, which is a TH, and then it makes way more sense. And then we're going to do 11:45 to 12:45 p.m. Forgot the space again. And then finally, we're going to do Friday, 10:15 to 11:15 a.m. I'm going to hit escape to exit typing. I can hit V for the select tool if it didn't automatically pop up. And I'm going to bring this over, and I'm going to roughly center it on the llama. And then I'm going to drag it over, and I'm going to have it just inside a little bit from the edge of these 2 lines of text. And then I want to space this out a little bit. There's a better way to do it than this, but I don't want to introduce too many things at once. So we're just going to use the space bar in this case. And the one that is the furthest over is either Thursday or Wednesday. I'm just going to add a couple spaces. And then I'm going to use the space bar to equal out the left edge of all of these-ish. It won't be perfect, but to kind of space it out in a way that makes it easier for people to parse what day they are looking for out of this list. Then you'll want to save it. So you'll come up to File, and you'll go to Save. It'll ask you where you want to save it. I've saved it to my desktop, so I could resave it by going to File, Save As. Desktop, please. Yes, this is fine. And then, because I already have one, I have to click OK. You'll get this window, and you'll click OK. Now, if you got something about the Creative Cloud, just say on your computer and don't show again, so you don't have to keep putzing around with that Creative Cloud thing. All right, after you've saved your Illustrator file, you're going to want to make a JPEG. To make a JPEG, we're going to come up to File, and we're going to go to Export, and we're going to go to Export for Screens, because that's what we're working with for this one in this case. I'm going to export it to my desktop. You can choose where by clicking this folder. Create subfolders might be on by default. I don't really want subfolders in this case, so I'm going to turn that off. And then I'm going to do scale at 300 ppi, and I'm going to do JPEG 100. I have them as options that drop down out of here. So the option for the 300 ppi one is resolution. Now, irritatingly, it's not going to keep the file name that we had from the other one because it's going to use the artboard name, which we did not change in our document. So if you want to change the file name now, this is where you would type in chapter 13-sticker if you want the file name to reflect that. Otherwise, you can always change it after the fact by right-clicking on the file when it's on your computer and choosing rename. Go ahead and click export, and now you have a Illustrator version of it, and you have a JPEG version of it ready to go on your computer. That's it. Hopefully this isn't too hard for you.